So one of the questions asked about Chapter 12, interest groups, was the question, how were interest groups originated? What role do they play in today's politics? And is it, and I'm presuming it refers to interest groups, a positive or negative to American politics? I think this question really gets at some core ideas about interest groups. And what I want to do is split it up into three questions. And the first one, how were interest groups originated? I want to spin it more as to why do interest groups form? We have always had interest groups since the beginning of the Republic. People that were interested in economic issues, people that might have been interested in social issues. But the real question for political scientists is, why do interest groups form? How do they bring people into a particular interest group? And if you think of interest groups in the basic definition, kind of in the textbook there on page 368, an interest group is an organized group of people that attempts to influence government policies, oftentimes through lobbying. Another way to think about interest groups is that it's an association of like-minded, similarly interested individuals, people that share a common idea, that want to see things done, and they come together, and most importantly, they want to influence government actions. This is a key difference between interest groups and political parties. Political parties want to control government by getting their candidates elected. What interest groups want to do is to influence government actions. And so the difference between the two, while they may be very compatible, they work together, interest groups are very different from political parties. Now, in political science research, what we know is that interest groups may form due to a variety of reasons. One of the first ones is the fact that interest groups may use incentives to get people to join a particular group. The book talks about the idea of the free rider problem and collective action. What interest groups oftentimes try to do is lure people to join, to become members of their interest group by offering them incentives. And there are different types of incentives that could be given. For example, there may be material incentives given. This is tangible rewards, things like benefits, perhaps personal services. If you belong to a group like AARP, they may give you travel discounts. Those kinds of material incentives can be very individualistic, one that is gained in terms of value and given only to specific individuals, or it could be something exclusive that the group enjoys and that free riders can't enjoy. Another type of incentive is the solidary incentives. And this is more than just material. Material can be economic, it can be, a kind of tangible. You get a calendar for joining a particular Save the Whales kind of an interest group. But solidary incentives are the kind of fellowship that inspires feeling among individuals. This is kind of the heart aspect of interest groups. Join us because you are passionate and that you want to interact with other individuals about a particular issue. The third type is what we call purposive incentives. And this derives from the satisfaction of joining the group and trying to advance their agenda, their particular purpose for existing. And so members may join an interest group for a variety of reasons, but oftentimes we see these incentives play crucial parts, whether they're getting something materially, whether they're finding fellowship in joining the group, or they want to advance the purpose of the particular group. You could also find that interest groups form due to disruptions in society, or perhaps more importantly, in the economy itself. You could also see threats to a particular group that may form in retaliation or in backlash to those threats that were given to them. Oftentimes, we ascribe the threat thesis, what political scientists call the threat thesis to group formation, to a group like gay rights. Before the 1960s and the 1970s in particularly, there weren't a lot of pro-gay rights interest groups. But once gay rights came into formation, once the threat to the group was recognized and acknowledged as it had been for some time, groups tended to form to carry out an attempt to influence government actions. You could also see groups develop and form based on exchanges between somebody who is what's called an entrepreneur, someone who is really passionate about an issue, who takes the lead, becomes the leader, and the members themselves. Perhaps the entrepreneur offers a type of incentive that the member wants to be part of, but then that develops into an interest group. So really, those are kind of the ways that interest groups could form when they're trying to overcome the free rider problem and the collective action problem. So the second question is really about the role. What role do interest groups play in today's politics? And I think it's important, as we've been studying the Constitution, to look back at the First Amendment. Yes, a lot of people recognize that the First Amendment is about freedom of speech, or the religion clauses, or freedom of the press. But remember, two critical components of the First Amendment is the right to assemble and the right to petition the government. This is oftentimes the basis for what we see the formation of interest groups. We have an issue that we want the government to resolve. We come together, we assemble, and we move forward to petition the government. We lobby the government to get our particular concerns had. And interest groups are just as important as all the other areas of what political scientists call political behavior. Political parties, voters, campaigns, candidates, even the media, public opinion. Interest groups are all part of this political behavior and is part of today's politics in the United States. The core thing to always think about and to remember with interest groups is that they seek to influence and represent their interest. And oftentimes the interests are very narrow. You can almost think of it as kind of a single topic or single issue concern that interest groups have. That issue could be very broad. It could cover a lot of people, but oftentimes those interests tend to be very narrow and singular, as opposed to a political party where we talked about the idea of big tents, bringing a lot of these interests under one umbrella or big tent. And oftentimes, in order to execute that influence to petition the government, they engage in either direct or indirect influence of government deciders. And again, the textbook does a really good discussion about the different techniques, particularly lobbying. It's under the section Strategies for Influencing Policy, beginning on page 376 of Lowy. I would encourage you to really take a close look at a lot of those. I think one of the key things, and this may have an impact on this next question, is really the question about resource-rich groups versus non-resource-rich groups. And by resource-rich, I mean those groups that have the economic means by which is either built into their membership or they're able to accumulate through their membership resources to be able to influence government deciders. But there are different types of resources available to influence different government deciders. As you look in the textbook, the difference between direct lobbying, even within direct lobbying, there are different ways to go about lobbying. You could lobby Congress, you could lobby the president, you could lobby administrative agencies, you can lobby the courts. All of those are different ways by which you can influence government deciders and could be different ways of funding, either resource-rich or non-resource-rich. Again, I would focus your attention on pages 376 to 390, the strategies for influencing policy. Some of those strategies are very expensive. Some may not be. And there's differences that different groups can utilize to their benefit. The final part of the question, are interest groups positive or negative to our politics? And I think it depends on how successful a group is or what they attempt to do. That oftentimes talks about the positive or negative aspects. Remember, all interest groups are wanting to be successful in trying to influence and to impact the decisions that government makes. On the positive side, it certainly allows individuals to band together and have kind of a force in numbers. One individual may not be able to influence government, but if you get an association or a group of individuals, say 100,000 or 1,000,000 or 50 million, people together who are spread out across the country and who could use that strength in numbers, that force in numbers, to influence members of Congress, to influence the executive agencies. That certainly is a positive to what government is supposed to do. It allows the group's views and interests to be collectively expressed. Yes, we're all individuals. Yes, we all have our different takes. But a lot of people agree on different issues, and that allows the group's views to come together and to be collectively expressed. Anyone can form a group to directly or indirectly influence politics and policy. Again, going back to the First Amendment, the right to assemble, to gather together, and the right to petition the government, to influence, to lobby the government. Now, certainly the contribution to broader political debates is also very much seen as a positive of interest groups, simply because while they focus on one issue, it may be a very important issue to them, and that helps to create the environment by which we discuss and debate public policies. The negative aspects are certainly that, as discussed in one of the questions, the upper class bias, and the fact that those groups that are resource rich may actually defeat the idea of pluralism or allowing all groups to have a say in our governing system. Certainly the free rider problem and collective action issues can be seen as a negative. If you can get something, a kind of benefit that you don't have to pay for, that's the free rider problem, and that's what groups try to overcome. And certainly there are numerous competing groups on numerous issues. There are so many interest groups out there that are on perhaps one issue, but from different political perspectives, different ideological perspectives, different ways of thinking about a particular issue. That could cause certainly a negative to our political environment.